Hello and welcome to Tag Tuesday, in which I present I Love the Book, I Love the Movie tag. The original tag was created by Joey at Game of Authors, and I'll provide the link to his video in the show notes below. I highly recommend that you go over and subscribe to Joey's channel. He's creative, entertaining and unassuming. I was tagged by Samuel Daram. I will leave a link to his video of this tag, which is highly recommended, and subscribe to his channel while you're there. He's knowledgeable, engaging and likeable. Most of my books and movies based on them are heavily classics based, but as that is where my main interest lies, it should not be surprising. Number 1, The Night of the Hunter by Grubb. Two young children, Pearl and John Harper, are being raised alone by their mother in Cresap's Landing, Ohio. Their father, Ben, has just been executed for killing two men in the course of an armed robbery. Ben never told anyone where he hid the $10,000 he stole. Not his widow Willa, not his lawyer, nor his cellmate Henry Preacher Powell. But Preacher, with his long history of charming his way into widows' hearts and lives, has an inkling that Ben's money could be within his reach. As soon as he is free, Preacher makes his way up the river to visit the Harper family, where, he hopes, a little child shall lead him to the fortune that he seeks. The movie of The Night of the Hunter was directed by Charles Laughton. Robert Mitchum stars in this thriller set in the 1930s in the rural American South. Psychopathic preacher Harry Powell, played by Mitchum, is arrested for a minor offence in a small West Virginian town. His cellmate, Ben Harper, played by Peter Graves, who faces the death penalty, confides that he has hidden $10,000 from a bank robbery. When Powell is released, Harper has already been hanged, so the preacher tracks down his widow, played by Shelley Winters, and his children in an attempt to get his hands on the loot. In the entire history of American movies, The Night of the Hunter stands out as the rarest and most exotic of specimens. It is, to say the least, a masterpiece, and not just because it was the only movie directed by flamboyant actor Charles Laughton, or the only produced solo screenplay by the legendary critic James Agee. Laughton's brilliant, fantastical, overheated style, in which German expressionism, religious hysteria, grim fairy tale fantasy and stalker movie are brought together in tension-filled and suspenseful story. Full of dramatic, primal and sinister images, the preacher's shadow looming over the children in their bedroom, the magical boat ride down a river whose banks teem with fantastic wildlife, those tattoos of love and hate on the unholy man's knuckles, the golden locks of a drowned woman waving in the current, along with the indigenous plant life in her watery grave, are haunting images. Number 2, Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. Pride and Prejudice is a romantic novel by Jane Austen, first published in 1813. The story charts the emotional development of the protagonist, Elizabeth Bennet, who learns the error of making hasty judgments and comes to appreciate the difference between the superficial and the essential. The comedy of the writing lies in the depiction of manners, education, marriage and money during the British Regency period. The 6-part BBC TV series starring Colin Firth, Jennifer Isle and Julia Sawalha, adapted by Andrew Davies, is memorable for sending the female population of the UK into a tither as Colin Firth emerged from the lake in a wet shirt. That aside, it was a brilliant adaptation and superbly acted. The romance, drama and humour of Jane Austen's greatest novel are captured by an all-star cast in this 1995 adaptation by award-winning writer Andrew Davies. The arrival of wealthy Mr. Darcy causes great excitement within the Bennet family. One of her 5 daughters, Mrs. Bennet feels, is sure to capture the heart of the wealthy young aristocrat. That fate befalls the spirited Elizabeth. Number 3, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. Jane Eyre ranks as one of the greatest and most perennially popular works of English fiction. Although the poor but plucky heroine is outwardly of plain appearance, she possesses an indomitable spirit, a sharp wit and great courage. She is forced to battle against the exigencies of a cruel guardian, a harsh employer, and a rigid social order, all of which circumscribe her life and position when she becomes governess to the daughter of the mysterious, sardonic, and attractive Mr. Rochester. However, there is a great kindness and warmth in this epic love story, which is set against the magnificent backdrop of the Yorkshire moors. My favourite movie version of Jane Eyre is the 1970 British television film directed by Delbert Mann and starring Susanna York and George C. Scott. Number 4, A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. To bitter, miserly Ebenezer Scrooge, Christmas is just another day. But all that changes when the ghost of his long-dead business partner appears, warning Scrooge to change his ways before it's too late. My favourite movie is the 1951 version titled Scrooge, directed by Brian Desmond Hurst and starring the incomparable Alistair Sim. Sim puts on a stellar performance in an accurate interpretation of the agony of a tortured soul. The fantastic and surreal events surrounding Scrooge creates a sombre and chilly atmosphere set against the conventional manifestations of love and cheer. The resulting redemption of Scrooge is a powerful testament to the power of love to transform and redeem even the most hardened and callous sinner. Number 5, David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. Dickens wrote of David Copperfield, "Of all my books, I like this the best." Millions of readers in almost every language on earth have subsequently come to share the author's own enthusiasm for this greatly loved classic, possibly because of its autobiographical form. Following the life of David through many sufferings and great adversity, the reader will also find many light-hearted moments in the company of a host of English fiction's greatest characters, including Mr. Micawber, Traddles, Uriah Heep, Creakle, Betsy Trotwood, and the Peggotty family. My favourite of the David Copperfield movies is the one from 1935, directed by George Cukor and starring W.C. Fields as Mr. Micawber, with Lionel Barrymore and Freddie Bartholomew. Number 6, The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. The story of Edmond Dantes, self-styled Count of Monte Cristo, is told with consummate skill. The victim of a miscarriage of justice, Dantes is fired by a desire for retribution and empowered by a stroke of providence. In his campaign of vengeance, he becomes an anonymous agent of fate. The sensational narrative of intrigue, betrayal, escape, and triumphant revenge moves at a cracking pace. Dumas' novel presents a powerful conflict between good and evil, embodied in an epic saga of rich diversity that is complicated by the hero's ultimate discomfort with the hubristic implication of his own actions. My favourite movie of The Count of Monte Cristo was produced in 1975 as a television film by ITC Entertainment. It was directed by David Green and starred Richard Chamberlain as Edmond Dantes, Kate Nelligan as Mercedes, Tony Curtis as Ferdinand Mondego, Louis Jourdan as de Villefort, Donald Pleasance as Danglars, and Trevor Howard as Abbe Ferrara. Number 7, The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. one of the most celebrated and popular historical romances ever written, The Three Musketeers tells the story of the early adventures of the young Gascon gentleman D'Artagnan and his three friends from the regiment of the King's Musketeers, Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. Under the watchful eye of their patron, Monsieur de Treville, the four defend the honour of the regiment against the guards of Cardinal Richelieu, and the honour of the Queen against the machinations of the Cardinal himself, as the power struggles of 17th century France are vividly played out in the background. But their most dangerous encounter is with the Cardinal's spy, Milady, one of literature's most memorable female villains, and Alexandre Dumas employs all his fast-paced narrative skills to bring this enthralling novel to a breathtakingly gripping and dramatic conclusion. My favourite movie of this book is the 1948 film directed by George Sidney, written by Robert Ardrey and starring Gene Kelly and Lana Turner. Number 8. Barchester Towers by Anthony Trollope. The second novel of Anthony Trollope's Chronicles of Barchester series, and widely considered one of his best and most popular works. Barchester Towers was published in 1857 and continues the story of Mr. Harding and his daughter Eleanor in the beautiful cathedral city of Barchester. Upon the death of the popular and beloved bishop, the citizens fully expect his son, Archdeacon Grantley, to fill the vacancy. Much to their consternation, however, the far more evangelical Bishop Proudie is given the position. A struggle for power ensues between the traditional and new forces. Mrs. Proudie, the bishop's overbearing wife, and the bishop's new chaplain, the distasteful and hypocritical Mr. Slope, use their power to control the selection of the new warden of the local hospital over the objections of the rest of the clergy. Clerical reinforcements are called in on both sides, and the struggle between the different factions of the church plays out amid the romantic entanglements and dramas of the town's inhabitants. In the end, the results are more than satisfactory for Eleanor and other citizens of Barchester in this witty comedy. The Barchester Chronicles was the brilliant adaptation by Alan Plater for the BBC in 1982 of The Warden and Barchester Towers into a 7-part television series. It stars Nigel Hawthorne, Alan Rickman, Donald Pleasance, Janet Moore and Angela Pleasance. It is set in the fictitious Victorian town of Barchester. Reverend Septimus Harding commands the respect of his parish, and with his son-in-law installed as the Archdeacon, intends to keep religious authority within the family. Zealous reformer John Bold comes into town to rail against Harding's ecclesiastical monopoly, creating unease among the Reverend's hitherto devoted flock. I'll say no more, but watch this series, which is available on YouTube. Number 9. The Way We Live Now by Anthony Trollope. Considered by contemporary critics to be Trollope's greatest novel, The Way We Live Now is a satire of the literary world of London in the 1870s and a bold indictment of the new power of speculative finance in English life. I was instigated by what I conceived to be the commercial profligacy of the age, Trollope said. His story concerns Augustus Melmotte, a French swindler and scoundrel, and his daughter, to whom Felix Carberry, adored son of the authoress Lady Carberry, is induced to propose marriage for the sake of securing a fortune. Trollope knew well the difficulties of dealing with editors, publishers, reviewers, and the public. His portrait of Lady Carberry, impetuous, unprincipled, and unswervingly devoted to her own self-promotion, is one of his finest satirical achievements. His picture of late 19th century England is of a society on the verge of moral bankruptcy, where the traditional virtues of Tory squirearchy, represented by Roger Carberry, proved to be no match for the financial genius of Augustus Melmotte. In The Way We Live Now, Trollope combines his talents as a portraitist and his skills as a storyteller to give us life as it was lived more than 100 years ago. Adapted by Andrew Davies, the BBC's production of Anthony Trollope's tale of power and corruption in Victorian London captures the raw energy and excitement of the most powerful city the world had ever seen, as the turmoil of the old order is swept aside by the brash new forces of business and finance. When the great financier Melmoth, played magnificently as a brash and towering figure by David Suchet, arrives in England and announces a profitable new venture, all manner of people sit up and take notice, and not least the aristocratic yet impoverished Carberry family. However, the power of big business and the privileges of the old order seldom sit well together, as the Carberry family will soon learn for themselves. It is packed with incident and fascinating characters involving elopement, scandal, suicide, fortunes made and lost, love lost and won. Number 10, The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. A contemporary classic, The Remains of the Day is Kazuo Ishiguro's beautiful and haunting evocation of life between the wars in a great English house of lost causes and lost love. In the summer of 1956, Stevens, the aging butler of Darlington Hall, takes respite from his butler's duty to undertake a short excursion into the West Country to visit Miss Kenton, a woman who once worked with him as Lord Darlington's housekeeper. On his travels he reminisces about his life dedicated to serving his master, proudly and faithfully, and somewhat on the margin about the ups and downs of his volatile relations with Miss Kenton, about his father, and about life in the grander scheme of things. The comparatively minor concerns of Stevens are set against the backdrop of the politics of appeasement preceding the outbreak of World War II. Stevens' loyalty to his job takes precedence over his undoubtedly deep but suppressed feelings for Miss Kenton, and over his better judgment in relation to Lord Darlington's treacherous politics. Oscar winners Anthony Hopkins for The Silence of the Lambs and Emma Thompson for Howard's End reunite with the acclaimed Merchant Ivory filmmaking team for this extraordinary and moving story of blind devotion and repressed love. Hopkins stars as Stevens, the perfect English butler, an ideal carried by him to fanatical lengths as he serves his master, Lord Darlington, beautifully played by James Fox. Darlington, like many other members of the British establishment in the 1930s, is duped by the Nazis into trying to establish a rapport between themselves and the British government. Thompson stars as the estate housekeeper, a high-spirited, strong-minded young woman who watches the goings-on upstairs with horror. Despite her apprehensions, she and Stevens gradually fall in love, though neither will admit it, and only give vent to their charged feelings via fierce arguments. Marvellously acted by a supporting cast that includes Christopher Reeve and Hugh Grant. If you love books and you love movies, then see the next screen. You are tagged. And now here's a quick recap of all the books, and I'll be back on Thursday with my December month-end wrap-up and January TBR.